Hey guys, Mr. Tweet here. I think this year we have a presidential election that's not really that different from most years. It seems like just about every presidential election, there's a really common thing that you hear amongst lots of voters, and that is they don't like either one of the candidates and they feel like they're choosing between the lesser of two evils. And oftentimes they'll say, like, I don't really like so and so, but at least he's not that person because they're even worse. And I wish we had a real choice, or, I wish we had some sort of like third party option. But, again, you hear this like every presidential election. This year it's Trump and Biden. 4 years ago it was Trump and Clinton. It doesn't really matter who the people are. It's the same idea is expressed every election. So today we're going to try to figure out why that is. And in large part, I'm going to argue it's because of the voting system that we use. Now, kind of the assumptions that the model I'm going to show you relies on. Assume that people vote for the candidates who are most similar to them politically and are likely to win. So that, most voters are going to vote for somebody who's like them and they think is going to win. And then we also going to assume that most politicians, that they're in it to win, that's what they want. So what you end up with in our political system is we end up with politicians who tend to be more extreme in the primary. They tend to be boring, middle of the road in the general election. They tend to try to make their opponent look bad, whether more than they try to make themselves look good. They try to make their opponent look bad. And yeah, that's what we get. So why is that? Well, a big reason why is because of the plurality and voting system that we have, where it's also a winner-take-all system. So this plurality and winner-take-all aspects are going to be, in large part, determine the quality of the candidates that we get. And so if you can kind of like, I'll show you guys here. If you kind of can think of like, this line here is like our political spectrum. And so I've got, the Republicans on the right, and we've got our Democrats on the left. And then, your voters are going to be kind of distributed something, it's going to be kind of, probably pretty close to like a normal distribution for those of you who like taking statistics, right? So that what you're going to see, each one of these lines maybe represents 10,000 voters, that you're going to see more people in the middle, less people on the two extremes, right? So like, extreme Democrats over here, extreme Republicans right here, and then moderates in the middle, right? So in a primary election, you have Democrats voting for Democrats, Republicans voting for Republicans in almost every state, except for California. But for presidential elections in California, it's this way as well. So what ends up happening is you can kind of like in that primary election, you can kind of like almost like split this thing in half, so that we've got like Republicans on this side looking for a Republican candidate, Democrats on this side looking for a Democratic candidate, and then even like a lot of times you'll have like these people in the middle who really aren't either political party. And in most states, they don't get to vote in the primary election for president or whatever if you're not a member of a political party. So you got your Democrats over here, your Republicans over here. In the primary election, the most extreme voters are usually the ones who vote. So turnout, that means the number of people who vote, really low in a primary election. So like in a primary election, especially in a non-presidential year, you might get 40% of voters turn out to vote. That's less than half of the people registered to vote who show up. And like, it's only like 60% of Americans who are eligible to vote register and vote anyways. So you're looking at like 40% of 60% show up in a primary non-presidential election. In a primary presidential election, depending on whether it's a competitive race or not, you might see somewhere around 50 to 60% show up in that primary election. And then even in a general election for president, you might get somewhere around like 80, like 70 to 80% turnout And again, that's 70 to 80% of people who are registered to vote, not even 70 to 80% of people over the age of 18. So turnout really low, especially in primary elections. But here's the thing, the people that you can be sure of showing up, the ones who show up every election, are going to be your most extreme voters. So in the primary election, if I'm running for president and if I'm a Democrat, I'm trying to appeal to these voters right here, because they're the most extreme Democrats. They're going to vote in that primary election. So I want to make myself look like I want to, if I'm a candidate and I'm a Democrat, I'm trying to be right there, well on the extreme. Same thing with Republicans. If it's these guys that are voting right here, and I'm a Republican candidate, I want to try to put myself right there so I can get those Republican votes. So in the primary election, what we end up with is really extreme candidates on both political parties, both political extremes, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. Then, as soon as they win that primary, and for president, it happens in different states have their different primary elections on different days. So it happens over a period of like 3 months. As soon as you're the winner, like Joe Biden, when he figured, like at first it was like, is it going to be Elizabeth Warren? Is it going to be Joe Biden? Is it going to be Bernie? Like, who's it going to be for the Democrats? There was lots of choices. They started dropping out. And then pretty soon it was just down to Bernie and Joe Biden. And then even after, it wasn't long before Bernie realized that there was no chance for him to get enough votes for him to be the Democratic candidate. And so he dropped out. That left Joe Biden. As soon as Joe Biden is the candidate, he's going to make a huge move to try to get right here, to try to get to that middle voter. Now, Trump, same thing. Try to get to that middle voter right there. So how do they do that? How do they get to that middle voter right there? Especially because they just spent months trying to position themselves on the extremes to win the primary. And then as soon as they win the primary, they start trying to move to the middle, right? So how do they do that? Well, they start kind of watering down their positions. Things like, here they would talk about, for a Democrat in the primary, they're going to talk about like, how we need to have universal health care or single payer health care, basically Medicare for all. You might talk about like, college tuition being paid for. And then what happens, as you start moving right here, you start qualifying that, right? Well, we need to have more programs to help middle-class families pay for college. Or we need to have, make more loans accessible for people, but not as much grants accessible for people. Or we need to pay for college for low-income people, but not for everyone. So you start kind of watering down your message, moving more towards the middle. The other big thing that they do is they start trying to make their opponent look bad. So what happens is they both are trying to appeal to this person in the middle, right? They're both trying to appeal to that person in the middle. So then that way they can win the election. They want to try to get the largest chunk of votes that they can get, that plurality, get the most votes. Now, if they're both trying to get to the middle, what it means is a lot of times their policies and platforms end up not being that different, right? So like the things that they talk about, right? Job creation, economics, things like that. They both are going to be talking about trying to appeal to that voter in the middle, right? So how do you make your candidate look more extreme? Well, like a lot of times what you'll see is, especially amongst Republicans, is that they'll call Democrats communists or socialists, and anything that Democrats are proposing that's, anything even slightly to the left of center, they're going to say, oh, that's communism. Oh, the federal government spending more money on paying for college for people, that's socialism. Or, we're going to have more government provided health care. That's the road to communism. And, we all know how communism turned out, right? Now, Democrats, they do a very similar thing. They're going to try to paint their Republican opponents as being kind of like, laissez-faire economics. They don't care about people. All they care about is profits over people, and you'll kind of hear things like that. That it's, maybe they'll attack them on some of the other things like law and order, and saying that they are like extreme, like a fascist, or those kinds of things. But again, it's all trying to make yourself appear in the middle and make your opponent look like the bad guy. Oftentimes this also means a focus on personality. So what you'll get is like, vote for me because I'm honest, don't vote for my opponent because she's a liar, right? Or vote for me because I'm telling you like it, telling you how it is. I'm giving you kind of the straight talk. Don't vote for my opponent. My opponent's trying to trick you because they're deceptive and untrustworthy. So a lot of times you see like what we call mudslinging in politics, which is where you have politicians that are attacking each other's character because they're both trying to get to that same voter. Now, last thing to look at. If nobody likes these choices, and if most people are like, this sucks, I wish we had another choice, why don't we see more third-party candidates? This year we've got Jo Jorgensen running for the Libertarian Party, right? Why does nobody pay attention to her? Why isn't she going to be included in the debates? Why don't more people vote for her? Because she offers maybe a real alternative, right? Well, the reason why is because whenever we get third-party candidates, they end up screwing over the people that are closest to them, right? So like for instance, in the Democratic Party, if we were to get like, if we were to see somebody who was like on the more moderate extreme left, was to try to create a new political party amongst like this kind of, extreme Democrats. And let's make a political party that's kind of more for those more extreme liberals, right? We have one called the Green Party, but nobody ever votes for them. And the reason why is because if the Green Party was to start really making a push, and if they were to start kind of trying to build momentum, and they were to say, you know what, let's say we've got like Trump right here, and we've got Biden right here, and they're both in the middle. And then we have a green candidate who says, everybody vote for me. The environment is my number one issue. I'm worried about global warming. I'm worried about social justice. I don't think that either one of those candidates are close to where I am. Well, what you're going to see is this person's going to start stealing away these voters right here. That some of the moderate Democrats are going to start going for that Green Party. And so now your Green Party is going to get some votes. Biden's going to get a few votes. Trump is going to get a whole bunch of votes. Trump wins. Same thing as if we get an extreme candidate on the right over here, right? That if we had an extreme candidate on the right who popped up, they're going to take more conservative votes away from Trump. Trump is not going to get as many votes, and then Biden gets all these, and then Biden wins. So whenever you have a third party that pops up, it almost always screws over the party that's closest to them and actually helps the party that's furthest from them. Examples of this would be the year 2000 when Ralph Nader ran as a third-party liberal candidate, stole a few votes away from Al Gore, and literally cost him the presidency, the state of Florida and the presidency. In 1992, George H.W. Bush running for re-election. H. Ross Perot created something called the Reform Party that was more conservative than George H.W. Bush. He stole some of those conservative votes away from George H.W. Bush. Bill Clinton ended up being elected president even though he got less than 50% of the votes. Clinton got like 42% of the votes, and he became president because he got 42, and then Perot got like I don't know, I think it was like H.W. Bush, he got like 30-something%, and Perot got something like 18%. But when it came to that plurality, who got the most, that was Bill Clinton in almost every state. And so he easily won the election because of that third-party candidate on the other side. So third-party candidates almost always backfire, and very rarely do you see them. Now, in 2020, we have a really interesting third-party candidate who's jumped in at the last minute. You guys know I'm talking about Kanye, right? So why is Kanye getting into this election? Well, almost every analyst thinks that what's happening here is that, that Kanye and Trump, however this crazy thing happened, that they seem to be in cahoots. They seem to be allied, right? And so what they're thinking is Kanye is not going to jump in like this candidate right here. Kanye is going to jump in somewhere over here. He's just to steal votes away from Joe Biden, right? And if they can get these voters here to split their votes, or even if it's a small chunk of voters to cast their votes for Kanye instead of for Biden, then that could be enough for Trump to win and get reelected. So again, it's kind of a fascinating power play. I don't know that we've ever seen anything as diabolical in this in American politics, where it seems like a candidate on one side is trying to convince somebody to run on the other side, even though they think that, even though they really have no chance of winning, that they're trying to convince somebody to be a third party candidate on the other side to mess up the other side. We've never seen that before. But it's a pretty, if they can get them on the ballot, it has a chance of stealing away some votes, and it's probably a pretty good electoral strategy going forward. All it does is it's just going to breed more cynicism in our country and probably lower voter turnout in the long run. But in the long run, we're all dead, right? So anyways, I know this is a long video. I went over a lot. You're going to see aspects of this in all of the 4 videos to come, and then I'll have an assignment for you to work on this with. So anyways, that's American elections. Tomorrow we'll finish up talking about elections, but we'll get into electoral college. But that's American elections, right? It's really important that you understand the role of the primary and the general election, how the primary leads to more extreme candidates. The general election candidates try to move more towards the middle, especially presidential candidates, right? When it comes to like members of Congress, primary elections tend to get more extreme members of Congress in place. We talked about that a little bit yesterday. So hopefully you're putting these pieces together and you're understanding how our electoral structure leads to the politicians that we have in America. All right? You got questions? Email me. That was a lot. I know. Maybe watch it again if you want. I don't know. Peace.